You know how some people talk about life-changing moments like they're these beautiful, enlightening experiences? Yeah, well, mine started in a cardiologist's office with news that basically flipped my entire world upside down. And honestly, what I did next probably makes me sound like a complete psycho to most people. But here's the thing. When someone tells you that your heart is literally failing and you've got maybe 5 years left if you're lucky, suddenly all those rules about being a good wife and mother start feeling pretty meaningless. My name's Tiffany, I'm 31, and this is the story of how a terminal diagnosis made me realize I'd been living someone else's life for way too long. Before everything went to hell, I had what everyone would call a perfectly normal life. Troy and I had been married for 4 years. We had our 2-year-old son Hayden, and we lived in this cookie-cutter house where everything was beige and boring as fuck. Troy worked some construction job that required him to leave before dawn and come home exhausted, covered in dirt, and complaining about his back. I worked part-time at a retail place, mostly to get out of the house and have something to do, besides change diapers and watch Sesame Street on repeat. Look, I know this makes me sound terrible, but I was already feeling trapped before the diagnosis. Troy was fine. He was a decent guy, paid the bills, didn't cheat or hit me or anything dramatic like that. But God, he was boring. His idea of an exciting evening was ordering pizza and watching whatever sports game was on. He'd come home, grunt about his day, eat dinner while scrolling his phone, then fall asleep on the couch by 9. Meanwhile, I'm 28 years old, stuck at home with a toddler, feeling like my life was already over before it had really started. The only bright spot in my week was Vanessa from work. She was this vibrant, funny woman who actually seemed interested in having real conversations. While everyone else at the store just gossiped about reality TV or complained about their husbands, Vanessa would ask me about books I'd read or places I wanted to travel. She made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in years. When she'd touch my arm while we talked or text me funny memes after work, it felt like someone actually saw me as a person, instead of just Troy's wife or Hayden's mom. Then came that appointment with Dr. Rodriguez. Dilated cardiomyopathy. Basically, my heart was getting weaker and larger, and there wasn't much they could do about it. 5 years, maybe less, depending on how quickly it progressed. I sat there listening to all the medical jargon about treatment options and lifestyle changes, but all I could think was, this is it? This boring, suffocating life is all I get? Troy tried to be supportive. I'll give him that. He started researching heart-healthy recipes and talking about getting a second opinion. But honestly, watching him frantically Google heart failure treatment just made me feel more alone. He was treating my diagnosis like a project to solve, not like his wife was dying. Meanwhile, Vanessa was the only one who seemed to understand that I was terrified. Not just of dying, but of dying without ever really living. She started staying after work to talk with me about it. Not the medical stuff. Troy had that covered with his spreadsheets and appointment schedules. But the real stuff. How scared I was. How angry I felt. How cheated I felt by life. Those conversations turned into long walks in the parking lot, then drives around town, then texts that went way past midnight. For the first time in years, someone was paying attention to me. Really listening to what I had to say. When Vanessa suggested we grab dinner after work one night, I didn't even hesitate to say yes, even though I knew Troy was expecting me home to help with Hayden's bedtime routine. That dinner changed everything. We went to this little place across town where no one would recognize us. And for 3 hours, I forgot all about heart conditions and dying and being a responsible mother. Vanessa made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt since before I got married and had a kid. When she reached across the table and took my hand, telling me how much she cared about me, something inside me just clicked into place. I know people would say I was just having some kind of crisis because of the diagnosis, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like waking up. Like finally understanding what all those love songs and romance movies were actually talking about. Troy and I had never had that spark. That electricity. We'd gotten together because it made sense. We were both ready to settle down, we got along okay, our families liked each other. But with Vanessa, I felt this intensity I'd never experienced before. When Vanessa kissed me in her car outside the restaurant, It wasn't some experiment or phase. It was like finding a part of myself I didn't even know existed. Here I was, facing down a death sentence, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely, authentically alive. I started making excuses to stay out later, claiming work emergencies or mandatory training sessions that didn't exist. Troy would ask questions, but in that passive way of his, like he was checking a box rather than actually being concerned. "How was your day, babe?" he'd ask without looking up from his phone. Meanwhile, Vanessa was texting me constantly, sending me songs that reminded her of me, asking detailed questions about my thoughts and feelings. The contrast became impossible to ignore. At home, I felt invisible, like a supporting character in Troy's life. With Vanessa, I felt like the main character in my own story. She made me feel beautiful and interesting and worth pursuing. When was the last time Troy had pursued me? When was the last time he'd surprised me with anything more thoughtful than picking up milk on his way home from work? I knew I was being selfish, but honestly, shouldn't I be? I had maybe 5 years left on this earth. Did I really want to spend them pretending to be happy in a marriage that felt more like a business partnership? Vanessa and I started talking about the future. Our future. She had this way of making everything seem possible, even with my condition hanging over us. We'd drive around for hours, planning trips we wanted to take, talking about getting a place together somewhere warm and beautiful. The breaking point came when Troy suggested we should have another baby. "I know the timing isn't ideal with your health situation," he said, like my terminal illness was just an inconvenience we needed to work around, "but I think Hayden would love a little brother or sister." I stared at him, completely speechless. Here I was, dying slowly, falling in love with someone else, and he wanted to bring another child into this mess? It was like he had no idea who I really was or what I was going through. That night, after he fell asleep, I made my decision. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend to be happy in this suffocating life when real happiness was right there waiting for me. I wrote him a note explaining that I'd met someone who made me feel like myself again, that I needed to explore this while I still had time. I packed my things while he slept, taking only what I absolutely needed. I left the note on the kitchen counter where he'd see it when he made his morning coffee. Part of me felt guilty about Hayden, but I told myself he was young enough that he'd adjust quickly. And honestly, maybe it was better for him to have one parent who was genuinely happy rather than two who were just going through the motions. Vanessa was waiting for me at her apartment with coffee and the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, and God, I really was. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself, choosing love, choosing to really live instead of just exist. The first few months with Vanessa were like living in a dream. We found this cute studio apartment downtown, and I felt like I was finally experiencing the life I was supposed to have. Everything felt fresh and exciting. Waking up next to someone who actually wanted to be there, having real conversations over breakfast, making spontaneous plans without worrying about babysitters or bedtime routines. Vanessa introduced me to her friends, and they were all so different from the people in my old life. They were artists and writers and musicians, people who cared about ideas and experiences rather than just paying bills and maintaining property. We'd stay up until 3 in the morning, talking about books and traveling and all the things we wanted to do together. If Vanessa wanted to drive to the coast on a random Tuesday, we'd just go. After years of planning everything around nap schedules and work commitments, this freedom felt intoxicating. My heart condition was still there, obviously, but somehow it felt less scary with Vanessa. She'd researched treatments and alternative therapies, not in Troy's panic, desperate way, but like, we were a team facing this challenge together. When I had bad days, Vanessa never made me feel broken or burdensome. She'd suggest we stay in and watch movies, or find activities that didn't require much physical energy. I felt guilty sometimes when I'd think about Hayden, but I told myself this was temporary. Once Vanessa and I got more settled, I'd be able to have him over regularly. Troy tried calling a few times in those early weeks, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to deal with his guilt trips or lectures about responsibility. Vanessa encouraged me to block his number entirely. "You don't owe him anything," she'd say. You gave him 4 years of your life and a child. You've paid your dues. The only real stress was financial. My part-time retail job barely covered my half of the rent, and my medical expenses were getting expensive. But Vanessa made good money at her office job, and she never complained about covering more than her share. She'd just laugh and say we were investing in our future together, that money didn't matter when you'd found your person. But then things started changing around month 4. Vanessa began working later more often, claiming new projects and deadlines that required her to stay at the office. When she came home, she seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly, instead of giving me the focused attention I'd grown used to. At first, I chalked it up to work stress, but then I started noticing other things. How she'd step outside to take certain phone calls, how she'd angle her phone away from me when texting. The name Riley started appearing in her conversations more frequently. Riley from the office, who was so funny and really got Vanessa's sense of humor. When I asked to meet this person, who was clearly becoming important to Vanessa, she'd brush it off, saying work friends and personal life should stay separate. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd left Troy partly because his questions felt controlling, but now I was feeling the same anxiety about Vanessa's secretiveness. My health started getting worse around the same time. I'd have episodes where I couldn't catch my breath, or chest pains that sent me to the emergency room. The first few times, Vanessa would drop everything to be with me. But as they became more frequent, she started having unmovable work commitments that prevented her from coming to the hospital. The worst episode happened on a Tuesday evening. I was making dinner when suddenly I couldn't breathe, couldn't stand up. Felt like my chest was being crushed. I called Vanessa, sobbing and terrified, begging her to come home. She sighed, and said she was in an important meeting, but would try to leave early. I ended up calling an ambulance myself. I spent 6 hours in the ER, getting tests and waiting for results, completely alone. Vanessa finally showed up around midnight, looking annoyed and checking her watch like she had somewhere else to be. When the doctor explained that my condition was progressing faster than expected, that I might have months rather than years left, her reaction wasn't the devastating grief I expected. She just looked inconvenienced. When I finally confronted her about Riley, asking directly if there was something I should know about their relationship, Vanessa got defensive in a way that confirmed my worst fears. She accused me of being paranoid and controlling, saying that just because I'd cheated on my husband didn't mean everyone was a cheater. The words hit me like a physical blow. The final confrontation came on a night when I was feeling particularly sick and scared. I'd had another episode earlier in the day, and I needed comfort, reassurance. Instead, Vanessa came home late again, clearly having been drinking, and seemed irritated that I was still awake waiting for her. When I tried to tell her about my doctor's appointment, she barely looked up from her phone. "Who is Riley?" I asked point blank. "And don't give me some bullshit about work friends." What followed was one of the most devastating conversations of my life. Riley wasn't just a coworker. They'd been seeing each other for months. Vanessa claimed she still loved me, but she couldn't handle watching me deteriorate. She said she was too young to tie herself to someone who was dying, that she had to think about her own future and happiness. "I gave up everything for you," I screamed at her. "My marriage, my son, my entire life. I trusted you with my heart when I knew it was literally broken." She just kept saying she was sorry, but she had to think of herself too. She was moving in with Riley the next week, and I had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Just like that, the life we'd built together was over, and I was left with nothing but a suitcase and a terminal diagnosis. Sitting in that empty apartment after she left, I realized the full scope of what I'd lost. I had nowhere to go. My parents lived across the country, and we barely spoke after I left Troy. I had no close friends anymore, no money saved up, and my health was declining rapidly. The only person I could think of was Troy, the man I'd betrayed and abandoned, whose life I'd destroyed for a relationship that turned out to be nothing more than a selfish fantasy. I practiced what I'd say to him 100 times before I finally got the courage to drive to our old house. When Troy opened the door and saw me standing there with my pathetic suitcase, He didn't react the way I expected. He didn't yell or gloat or turn me away. He just looked tired. Behind him, I could see Hayden peeking around his legs. My baby, who was now almost 6 and looked so much older than when I'd left. He stared at me with this mixture of curiosity and caution, like I was a stranger. "Daddy, who is that?" he asked in a whisper that absolutely destroyed me. This is Mommy," Troy said gently. "Remember? We looked at pictures." Pictures. My son knew me from pictures because I'd been gone so long he'd forgotten what I actually looked like. I tried to explain everything, the breakup with Vanessa, my worsening condition, having nowhere else to go. Troy just listened, his face completely unreadable. "You can sleep on the couch," he finally said, "until you figure something out. But that's all this is, Tiffany. I'm not your husband anymore, and I'm not going to pretend we're a family again." But living there was its own kind of hell, because it forced me to see exactly what I'd thrown away. Troy had transformed during our separation. The tired, checked-out man I'd left behind was gone, replaced by someone confident and genuinely happy. He'd learned to braid Hayden's hair, pack creative lunches, handle bedtime routines. Hayden barely acknowledged me those first few weeks. When he needed something, he went to Troy. I was a stranger in the life I'd abandoned. Then there was Linda. She was a nurse. Of course, Troy would end up with someone nurturing and practical. She was pretty in this understated, natural way, and what really got to me was how she interacted with Hayden. She didn't try too hard or act like she was auditioning to be his stepmom. She just talked to him like he was a real person, helped him with homework, listened to his stories with genuine interest. When she helped him at the kitchen table, laughing at his jokes and patiently explaining math problems, I had to retreat to the couch and pretend to watch TV. This was supposed to be my role, my relationship with my son. But I'd given it up, and now someone else was filling that space better than I ever had. Troy began setting boundaries that made it clear this arrangement was temporary. I couldn't just lounge around feeling sorry for myself. I needed to contribute somehow. The local hospital offered me a few hours a week answering phones, but it was barely enough to cover my medications. I felt like a ghost haunting the family I'd destroyed. Troy would drive me to medical appointments out of basic human decency, but he'd wait in the car instead of coming in with me like he used to. The final blow came when I overheard him talking to Linda about his plans to propose. They thought I was asleep on the couch, but their voices carried from the kitchen. "I want to give Hayden the stability he deserves," Troy was saying. "He's been through enough upheaval. He needs to know that the people in his life aren't going anywhere." The implication was clear. I was the upheaval, the instability, the person who goes away. Linda was the one who stayed, who could be counted on, who put Hayden's needs first. They talked about having kids together, about the life they were building. Troy's voice had this warmth and excitement I hadn't heard in years, maybe ever, when he talked about me. As my health continued to decline and the episodes became more frequent, I started to understand that this wasn't temporary anymore. I wasn't going to get better and find my own place and rebuild my life. I was dying, slowly and ungracefully, on the couch of the man I'd betrayed. The doctors had stopped talking about treatment options and started focusing on comfort care. My heart was failing faster than anyone had predicted. I was tired all the time, short of breath, dependent on Troy's charity for everything. This wasn't how I'd imagined my final chapter would go. Vanessa never called to check on me. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard she and Riley had gotten engaged and were planning a wedding. The woman who claimed she couldn't handle watching me deteriorate was apparently thriving without me, living the life we'd planned together with someone newer and healthier. The cruelest irony was that I finally understood what real love looked like, and it was what Troy was giving Linda and Hayden every single day. The patient, steady, reliable love that I'd dismissed as boring was actually the foundation of everything meaningful. The passionate, intoxicating love I'd chased with Vanessa had evaporated the moment it became inconvenient. I'd traded something real and lasting for something that felt exciting, but ultimately meant nothing. I'd given up a man who would have cared for me through anything, for a woman who abandoned me the moment I needed her most. I'd left a son who loved me unconditionally for a relationship that was built on fantasy and self-deception. Now, as I spend my final months on a couch where I don't belong, watching through the window as Troy teaches Hayden to ride a bike while Linda cheers from the porch, I can't escape the truth. I didn't leave my family for love. I left them for selfishness, for the illusion of passion, for the fantasy that I deserved something more exciting than what I had. The most painful part isn't that I'm dying alone. It's that I can see exactly how much happier everyone is without me in their lives. Troy is a better father. Hayden has the stability he needs, and Linda gets to love them both without the toxicity I brought to everything I touched. I made my choice, and now I'm living and dying with the consequences. There's no one left to blame, no one left to fool, and nowhere left to run. This is what I deserve, and we all know it.